We'll call this meeting to order of the Dunn County Board of Supervisors, the budget work today on August 13th on Saturday. First order of business is pledge to allegiance, and the flag is over there. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next order of business is call of the roll. Andrew?
Supervisor Johnson, Supervisor Pat Breslin, Supervisor Headland, Supervisor Score, Supervisor Zons, Supervisor Gary Bjork, Supervisor Wilsey, Supervisor Quinn, Supervisor Rogers, Supervisor Witzel, Supervisor Kinnear, Supervisor Barrier, Supervisor Calabrese, Supervisor Keeter, Supervisor Vogel, Supervisor Sean Breslin, here. Supervisor Vandermeulen, Supervisor Robinson, Supervisor Morehouse, Supervisor Hagan, Supervisor Thomas, Supervisor Randy Prochnow, Supervisor Gilbert, Supervisor Larry Bjork, Supervisor Bauer, Supervisor Leno, Supervisor Hartung, Chair Steen.
I'm here, and John Calabrese is excused. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody bright and early on a Saturday morning. I know this is what you want to do, but something that has to be done. I'll turn this over to Chris Corpola, our county manager, and to Bieta, our CFO. Thank you.
All right, good morning. Good morning to staff and good morning to county board supervisors. I wanted to begin this morning. Sorry, I have to revert to my social work days for just a moment to just say, I'll give you a sincere thank you for being here. One of the things that I always liked to tell my staff in DHS was that you matter every single day, regardless of what you do. Your contribution is affecting somebody's life. And as you sit here as county board supervisors and as the department heads and administrative staff who provide leadership to this county, if you think about the broad range of impact that you are having every single day to getting here on a safe road, knowing that if you happen to have an accident, you would have law enforcement, emergency response, you would have, that there are people that can deal with mental health and substance use and child protective services. And if you want to get married, you can get a license. If you want to have your well water checked, or you want to have your land surveyed, you just think about all the ways that what you do every single day, you contribute to what happens here every single day. And without you, we couldn't do it. So your being here this morning is testimony to the commitment that you've made to serve this county, both as supervisors and as staff. And your dedication makes it easy and a pleasure to serve with you. So we're going to pack a lot of information into today. And we're aiming to end by 1 o'clock so as to totally not exhaust your ability to pay attention. So I'll review the plan in just a moment. Today will not end with a balanced budget. And it may leave you with more questions than answers. You'll see that we're beginning this discussion with a large gap between the asks and the fill, and that is perfectly normal at this point in time. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's normal. If you've been on the board for any length of time or sat in the galley as department heads, you know that we always start with a gap, and then we work over the next couple of months to try to figure out how to creatively fill that gap. So don't be alarmed when you see that number. It isn't terribly different than numbers in the past, and we're going to work together to figure it out. The executive committee is going to need to make some decisions on priorities and funding, but that's a task for a different day. Our schedule will include an overview of the budget process, our financial starting point, and then a review of the programs and budget submissions by each of the departments. You have a notebook. Please jot questions and comments before or throughout the day, and we'll address them when we get to the end. Our concern is that if we take questions along the way, we're going to give you a couple opportunities for questions, but when we get into the department reports, if we get into questions, we're never going to get past Department 3. Because there is a lot of information. We've built in some breaks and would ask you to be quick in reassembling so that we can get through all of the material. Beata provided some rolls or some pastries and some muffins and bananas this morning. Please feel free to getting up, walking around, standing in the back, do what you need to do to kind of keep your brain moving, but please feel free to go back and grab a bite to eat. This is our first attempt at doing this in this magnitude, and we're going to welcome your feedback about what works and what doesn't work. And we're going to tweak it accordingly. And we're also curious about your feedback regarding the room setup. So kind of get through the day, see what you think about if you feel like you have sort of more ability to be engaged and to see and to hear what's going on, or if you want us to go back to the old design. I think, so let me really quick share with you. Okay, so this is our schedule for the day. You just got an overview from me. You're gonna see an overview, a short PowerPoint presentation that Beata has put together for our starting, kind of the start. You're gonna see our starting point of where we're at financially, and then we're going to review the department proposals. And as you can see, these go like this. So I think there's 30. So, so that's a lot of information. So we're going to try to give you an opportunity to take some breaks in that and just refresh. But with that, I am going to turn it over to Beata.
Good morning, everyone. Share my presentation. And I will share my screen. Just give me 1 second here.
Oh, Beata, before you start that, let's walk them through how to get to the materials.
Oh,
And then-
absolutely. Me sharing a screen perhaps would be, you can follow along.
No, but I was going to say, will you take them through from your email, or do you want me to do that? Take them through from your email, how to get to these materials themselves?
Sure, I can go through the email. So you should have received an email from me that has a link. And so I can walk you through. If you click on the link, it will take you to a Google Drive. So look.
Can you show them what it looks like? Can you take them through
I
that?
thought I'm sharing. I'm
Nope.
sorry. So when you click on the link, it should get you directly to this drive, this Google Drive. And then this Google Drive, I provided you 3 folders, organize them in that order. So first is the very top is the proposed budget summary. It's a very high level that's going to show you, it's a 1-page that's going to show you each department, their funding, their expenses, and levy and other information that we're going to discuss. The other folder is the department summaries, and these summaries is what we're going to focus on. And the other folder, the third folder, is just budget information. There's more detail there if you wish to dive into more by department. So one thing I want to point out too, that these items are organized in the order that Chris Corpola presented to you. So everything in there is in that order. So regardless of what document you're looking at in the program summaries or the budget information, it is in that exact order.
And would you show them really quickly, Beata, how to click on a file and download it so that they can maneuver more easily within it?
So you can double click on the first file and it's all PDF. You can double click on this file and it will open the resource here for you. Okay, so this is in a view mode and you can make it bigger or you can make it smaller. Okay, so to download the file, just have one screen. It's this button here. So keep in mind that as of yesterday, these documents were live. We were updating them as we noticed some needed changes. So if you printed one before yesterday, you might not have the latest and the greatest version. So just want to put that out there because I noticed some of you did a lot of printing. So
I know it's a little daunting to acknowledge that you're technologically perhaps challenged, but we are all technologically challenged, honestly. I was just talking to someone upstairs who was doing a meeting and she said, the meeting's easy. It's the technology that scares me. So does anybody need any help? Anybody with us? Raise your hand. I'm gonna go back and help Tim for just a second. Anybody else? Tim was brave. Huh?
I think I need Dan.
You need Dan?
Yeah.
All right, good to know whose help you need. And if you get stuck during the day, please, we want this, it is hard to navigate all these because there's so much information. So please don't be embarrassed to ask because it's a challenge.
yes, I will have these
Oh,
up on the
go ahead.
screen as well.
Go ahead, Gary.
I think our goal is to make it easy enough for me to understand. So if that happens, I'm pretty sure everybody here will be able to get it. So.
All right, I think we're okay, Beata, for the moment.
Well, are you ready to start? I have a presentation here for you. It's just a few slides. We just want to do some little bit of an intro, icebreaker before we dive into the budget itself. So first I want to say, welcome to the proposed 2023 operating budget workshop. As Chris here already mentioned, we're not here to, our intent here isn't to budget, but we've got some objectives. So the objectives of here is to really overview what are the Dunn's county's funding sources? What are our disbursements? We want to paint you more of a picture. Also, I want to highlight what are some of the county levy limit? What is our debt looking like? Our general fund balance. Then we're going to also share with you some of the assumptions we've made as we prepared this proposed budget. And then we're going to dive into the budget itself, which we're going to focus on the department summaries and the narratives. And the intent of those summaries is to provide you a story or a picture of what each department does, what it stands for, including any statutory requirements for their program, and also FTEs, meaning employees, what makes up their department. And the last one is the position requests. So here is more of a visual as to, and this pertains to our operating budget that we prepared for 2023. So here is a breakdown of what makes up those funding sources. So as you see, majority of that is levy. But as you see, that billable services and fees kind of outdoes the levy. It's 41%. Those are the services that we bill for. Those include services that DHS, other departments does, highway, for example, anything that we actually charge consumers for, fees and etc. The red is, of course, our state and federal allocations. And what those are is those are all different grants that we receive from the state. Majority of them are state. Federal would be, for example, like ARPA funding. And of course, here I separated ARPA just so you can see what slice of a pie that contributes. And other, so other 1%, those are like donations. That's probably all that makes up that other column, is anything that's not sales tax or vehicle registration or ARPA. Also, here is a demonstration as to what makes up our disbursements. And we know that majority of it is wages and our operations. So we're not in private sector where we're making widgets and selling widgets. So we provide a service to our community. So here is our assets, are our employees, the staff that actually does the service and the operations. We also have debt obligation and our capital improvement. So here I just want to give you some reference to, as we kind of go through this budget, help you kind of connect the dots here. So we do have a levy limit. So based on our audit report, our preliminary levy limit of that that we had in 2022 increased by $303,930 for 2023. Okay, now also looking at our debt, we do have outstanding debt, and our current debt as of audit report for 2021 was roughly about 47 million. But what's important to know is that our general obligation debt makes up of that 24.4% of the county's overall allowable debt limit, which is $191 million. So that means we have unused debt of 144 million. And the other great news is that Standard & Poor's, which is our global rating agency, rated us as AAA, which is stable. AA, which is stable. So this is really instrumental when we do borrow money and gives us an advantage to our rates.
Yada, can I interject for just a second? I just wanted to talk through that levy limit for a second. If this is too elementary for anyone, I do apologize. However, I will tell you that as many times as I've looked at it, I have, it's taken a long time to struggle to understand what levy caps really mean. So essentially, more than a decade ago, the legislators set a cap on the amount of levy that we could have. And they said you can raise that we could leverage they said you can raise it by a number called net new construction. It basically takes, it's a kind of maybe probably more complex formula that takes your equalized value for the year. It adds your things that you built, your new construction, housing and business, and it subtracts things that were demolished. So where your sort of your tax base decreased because you took down built businesses or housing or whatever. And it creates a percentage number that you can raise. And so in 2020, our preliminary 2023 number from the Department of Revenue is 1.35%. That means we can raise our levy 1.35% over last year, which for us is about that $300,000. So where this becomes so critical is as we get into these department needs and requests, you're going to see that there's nothing that's frivolous that's being asked for. Certainly we have all different priorities, but no one's asking for luxury vehicles and helicopter pads. These are the cost of continuing to do business. But all we can raise our levy by is that $303,000. So anything we add has to be at the expense of something else that we do. Even if we thought it was the best idea in the entire world to add a helicopter pad outside for the county manager, just because she might want one. We can't raise taxes to do that. We cannot. The only way we could do that is with a referendum, and I have a sneaking suspicion that probably wouldn't pass. So I think it's just really important because that is such a key concept to budgeting, and I think it's we toss that word around pretty easily, and I think it takes a little bit to wrap your heads around what that really means.
Right. Thank you, Chris. Now, the next one is to kind of give us idea as to where we are at with our Dunn County fund balance. And this is also based off of our audit report that year ended of 2021. So right now, as of 2021, we have a general fund balance of 17.2 million. And that is really an increase if you look at what it was in 2020. Also, what's important too is that rate of 60.6%. So what that is the percentage of unassigned fund balance to our general fund expenditure. So the recommended by GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, is, between 20 and 30. So we're double that as far as our, I want to say, cushion.
An unassigned fund balance just means that money that's truly available for us to spend. Not that you're going to spend all of your money that you've tucked away, but that unassigned amount is, so if you took our unassigned amount versus our total amount, we are in a very healthy financial position with regard to our fund balance at the moment.
Right. Also, we wanted to demonstrate why the difference of 4.8 million from 20 to 21. So obviously our fund balance has increased, and a lot of it had to do because we went through COVID. So we received some grants. So savings in other departments' expenditures, you see there was 1.7. So that has a lot to do with that. Also, the neighbors of Dunn County, okay, their expenditures, operating expenditures versus the money that they brought in was 1.3 that was put back into the general fund balance. And human services being at $1.8 million that was put back to the general fund. So this doesn't mean that they over budgeted. It means that they did build a conservative or pretty steady budget is because of the COVID, some services needed to be shifted, and also there were some grants that were received to offset some of that expense. So some of the assumptions that were done for this budget that I want to bring to your attention is that we've made here the assumption that we're not going to increase the levy. So we've reached out to each department and we asked them to build their budget that there's not going to be increase in levy. Also, we build in a assumption that we have a compensated mid-grid increase of 3.5%. That also includes a compensation grid step increase in addition to that. And because of our claims are being favorable as comparison to prior years, this also we recommend that there will be no increase in health insurance. So I'm kind of going backwards on the slide. So what is the next process in this budget is that executive committee budget will review and actually balance the budget. And that's not going to happen until September and October. And do you have any questions for me on this presentation?
Supervisor Power has a question.
Supervisor Bauer.
Yeah, wondering on the fund budget. What happens to money? Is it just sitting there somewhere, or you guys got it invested in a money market, or? And now we can start collecting interest, obviously, with the interest rates going up, or are we increasing that somehow? Where's that money at?
So the money for it's in a general fund balance, this is, we have an investment portfolio that's outside of this $17 million. So I don't have really the numbers as far as what that dollar amount is out of that investment.
You mean be out of that it earns money? That
Right.
$17 million does earn money and
Right.
it's managed by a different function. But yes,
Right.
it's not just sitting under the mattress.
Right. You have a question?
I see that there's a 0% health insurance increase, but that's not going to happen every year. Has there been any talk about maybe increasing the employees share? I see a lot of companies are making them pay a certain percentage when the healthcare does go up.
Yeah, so our insurance is self-funded.
Okay.
So it's a little bit different. Ours is based on the usage of claims coming in. So but also we are only allowed to keep certain amount of money in our, let's just say, fund balance for the insurance. If it goes above certain amount, then we have to return it. So we have to balance that based on the claims. So yes, insurance claims are going up. I think there was 1 year that the claims were a lot higher. So we needed to kind of compensate for the money that was withdrawn. So at this point, when we met with our group of who helps us administer the program, they determined that based on the usage, there would be no need to increase. If we do, we might run into the risk of giving it back. Right, yep.
Supervisor Vogel.
Thank you. I was curious about the general fund balance. So do we use that to balance the budget, or if we have some major expense that wasn't expected? Is that what that fund balance is for?
So when, for example, counties have a gap to close, whatever that dollar amount is, some of them can be funded by different sources such as debt, but that shouldn't be really used for daily operating cost. So typically fund balance would be used for those that would not necessarily be appropriate to finance. We want to finance something, that's going to provide dividends. So that is like building, infrastructure, high ticket items such as, equipment and so on. But the day-to-day operations, it's what becomes available to compensate or close that gap.
Thank you.
But also we want to keep it. We don't want to draw on it. I mean, so because it's difficult to replace a fund balance. We had a really good year in 2021 because of, believe it or not, COVID. Some departments received additional grants that were not there before. So we were able to put back to our fund balance. But that's, COVID is kind of like that anomaly.
As a general rule, this is very general, but as a general rule, over the years, the county has used probably between 500,000 and I'll say $1.5 million out of its fund balance each year to bring in a balanced budget at the end of the year. So it's trying to be very cautious about the use of that money. It's like your savings account. When do you tap into your savings?
Yep. But the general fund balance is what's available. That's not per se like restricted, because there are different fund balances, but this is what's available.
Supervisor Rogers has a question.
I'll keep it real to what we're talking about now, not the other stuff. But you said 0 levy increase. Does that mean we're not increasing our levy the 3% that we're allowed to increase it?
No, so when management were given a direction to prepare their budget, we ask them to budget their operating expense with minimal increase, but zero increase to what they were provided last year.
So as our starting point, because we only have it, not 3%, $300,000, 1.35%. We asked the departments to, as much as possible, outside of salary and fringe increases, which are in some regards beyond their control. We asked them to start at zero.
Supervisor Headland, did you have a question?
No, just a comment. The administrative committee does have, under the Department of Administration, a fund. I believe it's about $200,000 that is there for emergency purposes only. And it has to be requested. So for instance, if someone, it could even be for wages, if someone had a bad health situation and we had to replace them, for 6 months or something, that department could come to administration and ask for a extension amount of money for their budget. And it could be for a capital item also, something that, that popped up that isn't going to fit in somebody's budget. It's limited. Like I said, it's about $200,000 a year. If we don't have the request for it, we just return it. But there is that available without having to tackle the general fund balance.
And its common name would be the Contingency Fund.
Thank you. Are there any other questions out there? If not, we'll move on.
So we'll stop sharing this screen. Should we do like a short break so I can upload?
Yeah, why don't
my-
we do that? And people can grab a bite, a donut or whatever you wish. And if you just keep it to the next like 3 minutes,
Yep, we got donuts, muffins, coffee. and
Beata will get
some
us set up
fruit.
for the next round.
We starting at the high level?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, as soon as we can get away from the bunk feeder back there, we'll resume operations here. We owe a thank you to Beata for the pastries. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Pleasure's all mine.
I love you.
Hopefully there is enough. Well, thank you very much. So let's get started. I wanted to kind of show you that at a very high level, one page as far as by each department. So what's really in front of you is what each department submitted under the assumption that we covered in the previous presentation. So for some of you, this workbook or this document looks familiar, and for some of them, for a lot of you, maybe this is the first time. But just to kind of give you a high overview of that, it kind of intends to kind of demonstrate what did we end up with a budget in 2022. A lot of things that happened in 2022 as far as budget adjustments. So I've also highlighted those differences and what that impact has on what was actually our bottom line for 2022 budget. So then, of course, I broke out your expenses and identified the different funding sources. So other revenue sources, this is just, the grants, kind of lumped them all together. Any service fee, interdepartmental charges, donations, and so on. The transfer from other funds. So this column is identified that if a department such as treasurer had a decrease in their levy, meaning that their expenses were lower than their revenue, then last year what we did, and I followed the lead, we offset our general administration need by that same dollar amount. So that's why you see the negative and the positive. I also broke down so that you can see what's ARPA specifically, because that's important, part of our budget. And of course, the levy. Alternate financing, nothing is in that column because it is ultimately the executive board, I should say, direction to then say, what do you get for alternate financing? So here, I did not want to make any assumption that this is what's going to be given, because I wanted to demonstrate, well, what is that gap between our expenses versus the revenue, including the same levy amount we've received in 2022. And then you see the fund balance applied. So I just want to point out what that is as well. Fund balance applied, this is specific to, I want to call out on IT, because IT on a regular annual basis charges other departments for equipment. And it goes to a general fund. Then they budget how much they're going to actually spend for 2023. So also it includes a land preservation. Am I saying? Modernization, excuse me. That's the statutory requirement. So that is where that 173,000 comes from. 100,000 of that is IT equipment I'm going to draw on, and the $73 and $14 is the remaining.
Last year, I believe, last year was the first year down. Do you want to
Last-
speak to the?
Yeah.
Setting the IT funds aside?
Yeah, we are. Last year was the first year we actually drew 30,000 from it. Last year was the second year that departments started putting away funds for the replacement of their equipment.
And they're budgeted or they're saved in a sense on a 5-year rolling average. So when we buy a new laptop, we put 1/5 of that cost away for each of the next 5 years, so that when that laptop needs to be replaced 6 years from now, there's the money available to do that.
And the intent of that was that to avoid one big annual budget request. So here, what this does is each department, IT proportionately charges each department based on how many licenses or how many computers they have. And slowly they're actually treating that as a service contract to other departments. Okay, so when it's time to actually purchase the equipment, it will come right off that fund. So it doesn't surprise one year that we've got this $1 million request for IT replacement, replenishing of the equipment and whatnot. So that was my understanding, the intent of how the money is being put away to the general fund, and then it's being drawn on every year that there is a need for it, for IT specific. Any questions towards that? Okay. So the very last column, when you see in parentheses, and that really demonstrates that's the revenue that's needed from expenses versus the total revenue that's available. And I broke it out for you by the general fund versus the other, which is then our debt, highway, human services, workers' comp, and so forth. So at the very bottom, you'll see that our gap is $5.9 million based on what was submitted. I also highlighted here for you how much of that is wages. So wages is 1.7. And out of that 1.7 in wages, 425,000 is new position requests. So outside the wages increase assumption that was made, that leaves with $4.2 million gap. What's important too to highlight is where does library levy request is with the bridge petition levy requests. So that is taking, again, our whole total of our levy, what was given last year, minus those requests. This really gives us with what's county levy applicable to levy limits is decreased by those two areas. And then the 2022 estimated Wisconsin, this is based off the Department of Revenue, county levy limit, based on the construction growth. We estimated that to be a 1.35%. So we added 1.35% to the levy of as of in 2022. And then yeah, any questions on this workbook? And we'll go into detail of each summary sheets to give you a story behind those variances.
So the remainder of the day, sort of questions at the end, the remainder of the day is really going to walk through what comprises that $5.9 million. And again, Beata indicated that 1.7 million of that is the cost to do a 3.5% increase to the compensation grid and to move all of the staff that are eligible for a step increase on that grid. So we have a grid that has by grade and responsibility, kind of position responsibility by grade, and then by steps. And it's 11 steps in each grade. And as a general rule, although there have been some years where that was not the case, as a general rule, staff that are eligible to move up a step, and then that whole grid is also increased. And so this budget proposal has both of those things happening. So the remainder of the day will really be about talking about essentially, you'll see in each of the department requests how much of their request that's over what their levy was last year is related to salary and fringe. And then some of those are related to new positions, and you'll see those called out or spelled out. And then the remainder of the cost is operating cost at $4.2 million. And again, this isn't an unusual spot to be in. This is where the hard work begins of sort of thinking about prioritizing, but also thinking about, do you want to borrow money? Do you want to use any of the general fund? Do you want departments to cut costs? Where would you like to start to see this gap come closer together, ultimately to be closed, totally closed?
So with that,
You have a question from Supervisor?
oh, I'm sorry.
Supervisor Quinn.
Just a request, I guess, if I would find it useful if presenters could use the cursor to identify the spots on the spreadsheet they're talking
Sure.
about.
Oh,
So we can find those.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I have no questions, then we'll go into the summaries.
Supervisor Bjork.
Just the definition of a bridge petition. Less bridge petition, levy request.
Perhaps we could ask
Dustin?
Dustin to speak to that.
Yeah, so a bridge petition is any town or municipal structure that is 36-inch diameter or greater for a drainage structure that is replaced. The county has the authority or the ability to pay 50% of that cost for the total cost of that drainage structure. So any bridge, any type of culvert that's 36-inch diameter or greater qualifies for a bridge petition.
Supervisor Bjork.
So is this a bridge or petition that was not done? Is that why there's a savings? Is that what it says, the savings?
No, it's, I can answer that. It doesn't demonstrate savings. What it does, it's that, that bridge petition is, I want to say, not part of the levy limit. It's something that the county has to do, so we identify what the dollar amount is, but we're backing it out of our actual limit.
Both the libraries and the bridge petitions
Right.
are not required to be part of our levy cap. So we get to back those costs out from that cap. And that's what that's showing is, what would that cap be?
So less those items, we then demonstrate what is that dollar amount that's applicable to the levy limit. Because as you see, our levy in the pink shows 23 million. Okay, but what's really applicable to the levy limit of that 22 million is less those two items.
But we're still funding the library
Yes,
and we're still
yes,
installing the bridge.
yes.
Got it.
Excellent question.
Any other questions?
All right, and we'll go into summaries. So this is a lengthy document. In those summaries, what we're going to focus on is the story, which is towards the bottom of the page. Some departments have multiple pages. The top page is to demonstrate what programs they have. Identify, is it mandated program or is it voluntary program? Also, what is it that they do in those each programs, either if it's mandated or not? Also, it identifies is how is that supported? Or also how is it funded? And what are the expenses tied to that particular program? So as we go through these documents, some departments have more identified programs. Here for us in admin, we don't have a specific program. So I broke it down by somewhat of a division just to kind of tell the story. And then we also identified, well, how many people are in the department? So when we're referring to an FTE, what that is 2080 hours equivalent. So when you see 3.3, it doesn't mean 3.5 people. It just represents the hours that are being dedicated to that program. Okay. So there's, we'll start with the Department of Administration. You'll see reoccurring theme here for some of those changes, which relates to the mid-grid increase of 3.5% and movement on the grid one step with no increase to health insurance. We've also highlighted here is our bottom story. Oops, excuse me, a little too fast. Okay, the differences. So every document here is really consistent going through this same setup. So we demonstrate here is what was the 2022 budget. Also keep in mind that this 22 budget again includes any adjustments as of maybe a week ago that were approved. Does not include any adjustments that are in the works. So it does reflect anything that's been approved by the county board as a budget adjustment. So that's reflected in that number. So the cost to continue operations is what the budget was submitted by each department. And here we demonstrate the variances. And then variances in the funding sources and the variances to their expenditures. And also I've highlighted, well, what does that mean to the levy under the assumption that we're told them, assume that you're going to budget with the same levy you've given last time. So here I want to compare and say, based on what you're asking now, is that an increase or decrease to the levy in 2023? So in this case, for administration, this represents a decrease in levy of $167,503. Okay. So what compromises, what makes up this department is, some of the major highlights here. You see a savings in operating expense of 219. Keep in mind that every department, they did amazing work looking at their expenses and saving or demonstrating savings where it's possible. Okay, so here you see a savings of 219,000. We're asking for less, and that number really pertains to our SAP system. So currently, we stabilize the need to reach out to our developers, help us custom or create reports with our financial system. So that created some savings. We have a flat contract with them that we pay on a regular monthly. But in addition to that, there's $100 per hour in case we do have a request to write a report or custom make modification to our financial system. So the need for that has also decreased. So that kind of created the savings. And that's majority of what it is in the operating budget. Now, for the fringes, this is again, aside from increasing the wages, we also had savings because we had a accounting manager position that we actually filled with a lead accounting specialist for lighter salary or lesser of a salary. So that also contributed that. But in addition to that, as you see, we also there is a request for a new full-time administrative specialist who will support the county manager. And in addition to any other needs that might be. And only to end the story with our finance, also kind of want to share is, staff. Our department also generates revenue, but it's in the terms of interdepartmental charges. We provide services to the nursing home. We provide services to DHS, such as doing their claiming, doing their financial reporting, that kind of helps them. So we are partner with those departments. So we do what we call interdepartmental chargeback. So for them as an expense, for us would show as a revenue. So that demonstrates the request here. Next, we'll scroll down and it's HR. HR is also a part of Department of Administration function. So Department of Administration consists of finance, HR, IT, and CJCC. So what I did is I've provided you separate story for that each department versus at a high level. But on the summary that you see, it shows under one line. So you see that I think it was like 316,000, but it compromises, it equates to adding up these multiple departments. So it's admin, HR, and so on. So HR here has a staff of 6 individuals. So outside of the decrease in wages, you see that, they also decreased their levy by roughly about 30,000. And part of it is their staff turnover. We had HR director leave, which then got filled with our new HR director, and then she shifted her staff. So it's just some savings based on the salaries that were offered. So then when we're looking at operating, it's really consists of the IT need. Some costs are increased there, but that is here. So another thing I want to point out too is I separated, and you'll see this in a maybe upcoming slide, is I separated our capital improvement plan and identified exactly, you know, how it's funded, because I wanted to compare apples to apples so that you see what funding source compares to what and their differences. So here we have IT. So IT broke out for you all different areas that they really serve. Their network infrastructure, their servers. This is their core, some of the core functions of their department. They're also highlighted their support as far as staff that's contributed to each of these important functions. So as you see, theirs is a little lengthy. They also identified, yes, we have a statutory obligation, and they identified that accordingly for those particular programs. So if I take you back to their story, so aside from their wages, we also wanted to demonstrate, well, they're also asking for lesser levy. They had a staff turnover that contributed to some of those, but I also wanted to point out like the capital cost. Okay, so what they required last year might be quite different this year. And this year you'll see it's increased by 420,000. It's because they are including the additional items, but in addition to that, they're also offsetting their revenue by, I want to say, 145 to offset some of that cost. So the change here is revenue increase for CIP, because that is funded by ARPA funds. There was a 275 revenue decrease for changes to how those retained fees and computer replacements are budgeted versus carry forward requests. And some of the, go ahead.
Oh, so the bottom line is, while they are actually investing some money for capital expenditures, those are covered with a different source. And for their daily operating and salary and fringe costs, they're asking for a reduction in the amount of levy that they need to do that.
Right.
Is that accurate?
That's accurate, because again, the CIP capital improvement is funded by ARPA. So that helps. Then we are at a criminal justice collaboration division. There too did an amazing job by highlighting what is the core function of that department and their mandates, and they also provided you references for further reading. So here, there too decreased their levy by 32,000. But some of the important changes here lies in their revenue. You see, like, yeah, you know, their revenue reduced in state grants because they ended in 2022, but at the same time, they don't really have the expense to offset that grant. Because typically when the new grant is received, that new grant will have expenses tied to it. So if there's no grant, they didn't budget that they would anticipate that expense. And I provided more of a detailed narrative here for you as a reference to break out those differences. Because some of their grant is 50-50 levy, where it requires our match versus what the grant. And that's very common in DHS has very much similar. It's just a different levy requirement. So then we have health insurance. So health insurance, again, we noted that based on the claims usage and we self-funded, we don't anticipate or we don't propose an increase. Last time we've met with our administrator for help us administer this program is that they seeing a decrease that could, a decrease that, could be potentially not only a zero increase, but maybe could be a decrease in the premiums. But we won't know for sure until later in the year, because they don't, that numbers won't be available till late September. September 4th.
Yep, absolutely.
So of course, there is no levy. Because it's self-funded by the revenue that contributes, and a lot of that revenue is really our employer contributions and the employee contributions. Yes, sir.
Beata, I have a question. What percent does the administrator charge to handle it?
The program.
Yeah.
Charge ourselves.
Yeah.
Yes, we do charge. And I don't know if I have this in this narrative. Well, I'll see if maybe Jenna can answer that. I'm sorry, Jenna.
Yeah, if we have an outside firm that administers anything for us, what percentage or what cost is there?
There are a couple of areas that would contribute to that. We have a third-party administrator that actually processes the claims with employees. And then we also have an insurance broker that advises us and makes sure that everything's compliant and all of those things. Those are broken down as line items in the actual budget request workbook. And I don't have that up currently, but the broker cost is roughly 80,000 for the year. And then the actual third-party administrator fee, I could look into and get back to you.
It's actually, it's actually provided in the details in the supplemental documents that we provided in the folder. I can see if we can go back.
I don't mean to hold up the process, but I was just wondering what percent that the third-party administrator charges to administer our claims, that's all. I can get it later, thank you.
I can pull that up.
So then that takes us to workers' comp. Workers' comp, we also have a requirement mandates. And here we have operating costs went down, but also our fund balance. And previous year, $1 million was carried into the fund, was drawn from the fund balance to cover to offset some of the expenses that we had in the workers' comp. Now in 2023, which is, again, the amount of difference of all other funding, that 112,000 is due to increase in premiums.
This year for
Right.
2022, the board approved moving $1 million from the workers' comp fund, which was very healthy, to the health insurance fund to offset the cost of providing employees with some health savings account incentive and the purchase of the Reform Medicine memberships. And you will hear more going forward here in the next few weeks about some of the outcome to those investments, but they have been very, very positive and are part of what's yielding such a strong improvement. It sounds like it was bad, but enhancement of our health insurance fund because those investments in what we've done with employee benefits have been really, really successful this year. So but we're not asking to move that $1 million. There's not another $1 million to move. Just by way of a little bit of background information, if you're a private employer, you pay into a workers' compensation fund on behalf of your staff. For governmental agencies, we retain our own fund. We only pay when there's actually a claim and it comes out of our own funding. So there's not, if someone makes a workman's comp claim to the county, it comes directly out of this fund.
Thank you, Chris. Which, oh, did I skip IT?
No, you did it.
No, I didn't.
Can I chime in with an answer quickly? Okay. Roughly 1.4% of the overall cost of the self-funded plan is contributed to the third-party administrator. And that's 130,000 for 2023.
Thank you. And in my experience, that's pretty reasonable.
So that takes us down to child support. Child support also have provided you multiple mandates and references. But here, what I want to highlight, the numbers are here from, I wanted to kind of keep everything in the same page. If it broke down in the middle, I was trying to keep it more organized. So, they've provided quite a bit of information for you as a reference to each of these unique programs that they have in the child support. But overall, they are actually requesting an additional $10,000 in levy. And part of it, even though you have a cost of capital, but that's funded by ARPA. But that is, and the other one is their operating cost and some of their staff. But at the same time, they're also will have a more revenue because that revenue is driven by, again, their usage. And as far as I believe there is a grant there as well, and that grant is driven by a percentage of the actual expense. So even though their staff expenses went up, so did their revenue specific to a grant.
Let's do one more and then take a little stand
Sure.
up and stretch break.
So we have court services. Court services also proposed a decrease in their budget, in their levy, and a lot of it had to do with their operating costs. So, and again, even though they've increased their salaries and wages, which was offset with some of the program revenue that they receive, but their overall decrease in their operating expenses was minimal due to some of those, as I have it in my narrative, I'm sorry, which is decrease in their office due to small, it's just operations, office supplies, IT and those types of things. But also they also noted that in their revenue, right? So there's a 54 increase for revenue, which then that really aligns with the 5-year average of revenue that's collected by their clerk of court's office. So mainly their increase here is wages. Corporation counsel consists of 4 FTEs, and for this budget, they also have a new FTE that was approved in 2022.
So their salary and fringe costs are rising proportionately to adding that FTE position from last year.
Right. And then because of adding this one position, also required licenses or access to law books or resources for that additional person.
All right, let's take just a few minute, 5 or so minute break. If you need to replenish your coffee, grab another snack. This is
Continue, I also. Before we continue, I want to thank all of you being here, but in addition to all the department heads being here, they're here to answer all your questions once we're kind of done with the presentation. So thank you. So if we'll go to county board. County board, there was a slight increase here, but I've accounted for very same per diem. However, I also counted that there's a slight increase to the IRS rate. And then so I've accounted based on the current usage and what would that cost be. So then that levy increases that $1,000. And identified what other expenses are included, which is mainly the memberships. And also that doesn't mean we only have one person. This is, as far as our payroll. There's plenty, but this covers the county board. So in 2021, it was decided that we're going to budget the cost of the commissions and committees all as one versus separate accounts. So county clerk, there too provided your important information as far as what constitutes, the services that they provide. And of course, their staff that supports, which is two and just again, hours equivalent. So here, aside from the salaries and wages, they're also decreasing their budget by $53,000. And a lot of it, even though we accounted for some of those increases, some of the expenses that kind of drives that department, which is, the mileage that they're heavy on. Also, there was some increase in membership dues. So there's slightly small dollar amounts, but again, as far as legislative support, there was no increase. But significant decreases that kind of brought him down to this less of a levy need is that there's a $50,000 decrease in printing and duplications. And that is because they're decreasing numbers of elections. And another $6,000 also in publications due to the same issue or same thing as decrease in elections. So that's their main driver behind why there's a decrease in their levy request. So we have a district attorney's office. So of course, district attorney also comprises with the witness and victims and witness programs. And they also have one particular grant that supports that. So aside again here from salaries and, here they're actually increasing, but as you see, majority of that is their wages, very slight increase in their operating cost. And so they wanted to point out that there was a slight increase in their grant. Or decrease, should I say. So emergency communications. So here, they previously in 2022, there was some fund balance applied, but of 510. And previous year, there was some debt as well. But I believe that was because of capital costs that they had in 2022 that has drastically decreased in 2023. So aside from that, their revenue you see went up, which kind of helps to support some of their increase in wages, which is majority bulk of what makes that levy go up. Their levy request for 2023. So environmental services. So this particular department consists of the surveyor, the land and water, and then planning and zoning. So what I did, I provided you a high level of this particular department, but also for individual surveyor, land and water, and planning and zoning. So they do have a request increase in levy by $62,000. So I broke it out. Land and water is about 45, surveyors roughly about 10, and planning and zoning about 9.5. So there too, as you see in the summary at a very high level, cost here is their capital and their operating costs. So that's again at a high level. Now I broke it out by the surveyor. Surveyor 2 provided you instrumental information about their program, and there's quite a bit there. They do a lot of important things, but to sum it up, as you see at a high level, there's that ARPA fund to help them support their capital improvement request. Their operating costs remain pretty much the same, and their salaries and wages for obvious reasons. So therefore, their decrease is mainly due to the wages. I'm sorry, increase due to wages. The land and water. So their increase is 45,000. And again, they did demonstrate savings in their operating budget. And then again, what makes bulk of that for them is also wages. So I think it's important to note that a lot of departments did a fantastic work on looking at their operating and cut wherever they could. Planning and zoning. So there's a lot of mandates and requirements that we have to provide as a county. So they consist of 4 staff. And also you'll see that in their wages, even though there is a mid increase to, again, our wages, probably sound like a broken record. But as you see, their salaries and wages went down by 16,000. And then also I identify, and that's mainly because of a staff turnover. But then they also have a 1 request in a CIP, which then it's funded by the ARPA money. And last year they received some fund balance to help close the gap. And then this year I didn't populate because I'm not going to assume that that's going to be provided this year for 2023. So they're asking for 9.5. So libraries and external organizations. So I've here identified libraries, particular is Dunn County libraries and outside libraries. And the approved of a levy was 777,000, which was less than it was last year. So their operating cost mainly went up due to, decreased by 20,000. So they're asking for $12,000 levy. And that is due to their operating cost because they've decreased in their levy. So this $12,000, as you see, is the county commissions. Because what happens is 55,000 of that is economic development and external. So this 12 isn't pertaining to libraries. It's specific to the external organizations. 46,000 was for Dunn County Housing. 22,000 was for West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. and the county commission of 12, which that increase in from 2022.
Yes. So the contribution to Dunn County Housing and the contribution to West Central Regional Planning are required. The economic development is the recommendation of the CRT committee. And they also have made an additional request of $12,000 to purchase the services of a professional communications individual who would help to frame and get out the information about all of the things that the county is doing, all of the good things that they're doing or that we're doing, and then as well as manage when there's perhaps maybe some not so good things that happen. And it would cost about up to $1,000 a month for that individual. So that's the request at this point.
We have Fair Board, and again, a lot of their money, they're not so much driven by grants, but it's from the general public, vendors that come to the fair. So there's some slight increase, decrease in their operating costs, but so did their revenue need. And this is not a levy funded program, so therefore they have enough resources, funding to cover their expenses. So medical examiner. So medical examiner, here, a lot of important items to note, but I'll narrow it down. So wages, in addition to the typical proposed salaried or hourly staff, there was an increase in the deputy medical examiner from $10 to $15. And we've met with Eau Claire County, who is our partner with medical examiner. And we've met with them and we've discussed about the increase in wages to retain and be able to competitively recruit deputy medical examiners to provide the services. Also, in transportation particularly, because Eau Claire County closed their, where they perform autopsies. Yeah, thank you. So what that did is requires us to reach out to Ramsey County, Minnesota. So that increased the cost of that.
So
So,
just by way of a little bit of background, we do have a shared agreement with Eau Claire County for ME services. So Marcy Roses is that as our medical examiner has currently 2 and is requesting a 3rd chief medical examiner position. So those are full-time positions. And then she has several part-time people. Those part-time people have made $10 an hour during the shifts that they cover so they would cover, for instance, maybe a 12-hour shift and they would receive $10 an hour for that 12 hours. But that they might cover another 12-hour shift tomorrow and then not cover a shift for a week. Most of the deputy medical examiners have other full-time jobs. And so they cover intermittently. And so it's about, the need requires that there be minimally 2 people on every shift to cover Eau Claire and Dunn counties. If you think about that, because we've been in sort of a deep dive with the medical examiner stuff because of this new position and really looking at the funding to it all. And if you think about it, if there is a death and the medical examiner's office can't get there in a timely fashion, it holds everything else up. So you have law enforcement at the scene, you have, the funeral home at the scene, you have the family in distress waiting for a ME to show up. And so that it is staffed 2 people per shift. Marcy puts in a lot of extra time to cover those shifts when with balancing all of those individuals. But this does represent shifting that cost structure, which has not been increased from that $10 an hour that was established in 2016.
Right. But that also means that we looked at what we actually bill for the service, bill Eau Claire for their services. And we cost out, what is it really costing? We looked at exactly how much time. So we then were able to do quantify and justify that 80% is for dedicated to provided by Eau Claire County.
To Eau Claire County?
To Eau Claire County. So that's the methodology we then used to charge them that 80% to directly to Eau Claire, which then that offsets our expense. So our expense went up because asking for a full-time deputy to help fill some of the void and give up some of those part-time positions, and those that are remaining as a part-time, that their increase is from $10 to $15. So with Eau Claire, we pushing that cost to them to reimburse us through services. In addition to that, we also attach an administrative cost of 7%. So which also help to offset some of the levy need. So this is where we arrived at that roughly about 14,000, considering those significant increases in wages and the revenue coming in to offset that. So majority of that increase in increase in levy is due to our Dunn County, the operating expense, the transportation, now Ramsey County.
So for some of the newer board members, you probably have these experiences, will continue to have these experiences like I do, but it's like you learn things about things you've never, like, whoever knew that. But so just the little trivia piece, counties provide medical examiner services in one of two ways: by a coroner who's an elected official, or by having an actual appointed positions as a medical examiner. And according to Marcy, most places are moving towards that medical examiner model, although you will still find a smattering around the states of places that have an elected official as a coroner.
Then we are at public health. Public health has a lot of programs, a lot of important programs. So they've listed as much detail as they could. And then aside, again, from their wages, and you look at their operating costs went down, but so did their revenue sources. And this particular one is basically of the grants that was available to them that are no longer or they ended. In the event that they're going to resurface again, then they'll go through the budget adjustment. But this was based on what is known today. For sure that it's funding in the door, any funding that we could potentially get, but we're not 100% certain. We did not include them in here. And therefore we did not include the cost that would go with that. So in addition to the proposed salaries and wages, they also have a vacancy. It's a limited term employee that has about that 597 annual hours. And that's for their breastfeeding peer counselor. So this proposed budget includes those vacancies. So again, in an event that there's a vacancy that's eligible for benefits, we've made the assumption that they're going to have family benefit, because we don't know. They might have single, or they might not enroll in any benefits at all, but we don't know that. So for those identified vacancies, we've made that assumption. But for this LTE, it's not eligible for benefits, but it is a vacancy that's going to be filled at a lesser. So therefore it does contribute some savings.
And KT, Would you wish to just comment? I'm going to make an assumption, then you can tell me if I'm correct. So part of the levy request increase in public health is just related to readjustment post-COVID. Is that correct?
Right.
Would you care to speak to that for a moment?
That's really close. Okay, guys, so we did have a significant amount of grant dollars that came in because of COVID. We were able to offset some of our levy demand because we were doing substantively different work, so it was not supplanting. So some of my time was reflected in grants previously, whereas that's now a levy ask again. So it's kind of readjusting back to the normal for the levy ask in public health.
Thank you.
Then we have facilities. I just realized there's no such thing as public works anymore. It's facilities. So I, old habit here can die, right? So they're to identify their important functions. And they're actually requesting a decrease in their levy by 15,000. So as you see, there's differences in capital because they were again funded with different sources in comparison between those 2 years, 2022 to 2023. But bulk of their increase here is mainly in their wages. Register of Deeds. I mean, this one is, they kept everything steady and their ask for levy is 13,000. So even though they did pick up some additional money for their revenue source, which helped kind of offset some of the differences that they had an increase in their operating and wages. So then we have a sheriff's office. So I broke it down to the patrol, emergency first responders, and then the jail. So here the levy ask is $839,000. What's important to note in here too is that sheriff had a wage increase of 5% to all their deputies, in addition to the proposed increase, the mid-grid. Also, there is a request of 2 FTEs. So by just asking for those additional 2 FTEs, that's 246,000 off of that 800,000. Also, we needed to account for any anticipated retirement. So there's one potential retirement that will have a vacation or sick bank payout, and that's about 81,000. We have a treasurer's office, which consists of 3 staff. And they had a decrease of 271. So this doesn't really pertain to savings, but the amount of levy that funnels through the treasurer's office. And this decrease, or here it's called a decrease request and levy. This is what I want to say surplus, which then gets applied to our general admin to offset some of the levy need there. Because they're, again, they're not levy. Well, I want to say levy funded. It's just all the money in the treasurer's office comes from all these different sources of funding. So UW extension, I think it's known as extension. No, it's no longer UW. So as you see, if they've provided, the department provided what supports their team. But a lot of these FTEs or people are actually funded by, co-founded by UW Medicine Division. So technically only one FTE is at the UW Extension,
Funded by the county.
founded by the county. Thank you. And asking for a 7,766 in levy, and majority of that is wages and slight need in their operating, or decrease, should I say, in operating. So, and again, last year there was a fund balance that was applied, so I just didn't make the assumption that that's going to happen the same thing for 2023.
It looks like the other change for them was there was also a decrease between the 2 years of other revenues. All other revenues went down a little bit as well. So that is part of what comprises that $7,000 less revenue.
And so there's additional information here as a reference to their statutory requirements. So then we have veterans. I always say it's a small department, but they do big things. So here for them is a 2.2, but part of it is in wages is there is a new request for a one part-time position. And that's at about $10,000, or let's, if we rounded 11,000. But bulk of that 20 requesting in levy is due to salary increase and adding an additional part-time person.
And Veteran Service Officer Quinn, Greg is not here today because he is actually off on his 2 weeks of active duty, if that's what you call it, for his role with the military. But that is part of the reason for that part-time request. They're looking for 8 hours a week because they are a 2-person office. When one of them is gone, they're down to a 1-person office. And they do a lot with volunteers. They have a lot of volunteer staff and intern staff who come in to help, but really just looking to try to shore up a little bit of their coverage. They also have a lot of walk-in traffic. If you, from my days in human services, you can see the steady coming and going from the Veteran Service Office. So it's really looking to just enhance that coverage for them, because there are periods of time where Greg is not available because of his military commitments, and Jessica also has mandatory training that she needs to attend as part of her role in that office. And that leaves them down to 1 staff person.
So then we're reaching the debt obligations. I wanted to kind of highlight what is it that we're committed as debt. So I broke down based on the type of debt and when it was taken. So I have the most recent on the top. I've also identified as a reference what is the principal payment and how much of that is interest. But we also need to budget for third-party administration fees, which they're roughly about $1,500 a year. And for each of these types of go bonds. So I've highlighted that as of 2022, we had this debt of 41 million. And I broke out how much of that is actually principal. So our total levy for the debt obligation is 5.1 million. And that's what we have to pay in principal and interest every year. So of course, our debt principal went up because we've took on a new debt. So our new debt for total levy is that 527,000. And I provided a little bit of a descriptive as to what each debt was for.
And debt occurs outside of the levy limit.
Right. So that takes us to the highway department. So Dustin and I, we spent a lot of time on this particular workbook just to give you an idea as to what does it cost per category, such as, county maintenance versus local or versus state. Where's that funding coming from and what the operational expenses are. So this is a couple pages long, but as we get down to it's asking then for that 3.4 million. So also here we reference appendices. So Appendix 1 is the actual cost of equipment that was submitted through CIP. The other exhibit appendix we've provided that breaks out the state highway and our portion or our contribution. And state, and then there's the a third exhibit points out our county roads and the cost. So Dustin, do you want me to bring out those exhibits so you can discuss more in detail?
I think that would be helpful, Dustin. You know the details to this, and you also can speak to the consequences for doing or not doing these things.
So I will return to this, which is page 57. Okay, so my back button don't work. Oh no, because I'm pressing the wrong one, sorry. Summaries. Wrong one. See, I've organized it so well, I even forgot where I put it. Okay, so. There it is, here's appendix. Appendix 1, let me go there first. So appendix 1 is really highlights what was submitted for the Dunn County Highway capital improvement. And you see, we also recognize the cost, but also accounted for any trade-in or any sales that's going to take place to replace some of this equipment. So really the cost over here is 1.2 million, which then is supposed to be funded by CIP. ARPA funds. So that 1.2 million is not part of that 3.9 asking, because we've already accounted ARPA for that. Okay, now I need to go back to here. Okay, we have appendix. Okay. Go ahead, Dustin.
So what Beata is showing here is a breakout of our proposed county maintenance budget for 2023. Basically separating each division of what we maintain, such as signing, pavement markings, crack filling, seal coating, overlays, mowing, spraying, brushing, shouldering, guardrail, ditching, drainage, litter pickup, surveillance, and county accidents. I guess I kind of want to highlight on the right-hand side there is what we do on a yearly basis, average wise. Obviously, the big highlight is Dunn County has 425 centerline miles within Dunn County, 850 lane miles approximately. As you can see, our big ticket items are what we expense a lot is our seal coating, overlays, patching. As you can see, what it costs to maintain our roadways, for seal coating in general, we've allocated just over $500,000. Which gets us about 20 to 25 miles of road each year. So not a whole lot of improvement, I should say, when we have 425 miles of road to maintain. Like I said, the costs have exponentially gone up with oil. Obviously, we all deal with it every day, filling up our cars. Overlays and patching, if we put a simple overlay on a roadway, it costs about $125,000 a mile. We average approximately 1 to 5 miles a year for that. Also our spray patching unit, which is you see those trucks around that spray oil and rock pea gravel to fill potholes. That's what that is. We like to run those trucks every day if we can. It's the most cost-effective way to fill a pothole. And then on the very right-hand side of it, obviously the $275,000 for pothole patching. So it is a large expense. Some of this is obviously our revenue source with the vehicle registration fee has helped offset this cost, as well as our general transportation aid, which is gas tax. That helps provide a revenue source for this county maintenance. Looks like a very large dollar amount, but we have to maintain the roads that we have. So any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Dustin, what exactly is surveillance?
So surveillance is, let's say there's a storm that happens. We have to send the crew out to check if there's a tree down, any washouts. Like I said, they just patrol the roads just to make sure that there's no debris or anything in the roadway.
So we have a big blow and guys go out the next morning and see what's there, huh?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So Dustin, we are showing what it's cost, that is the cost to maintain it.
Correct.
This cost doesn't include anything new or construction of anything new. This is just for existing.
Just to maintain what we have.
Yeah, Supervisor Bjork.
Yeah, thank you. On crack filling and seal coating, are those lane miles or are they just both lanes? I mean, is it?
That's both lanes.
Any other questions?
We got one more exhibit, exhibit 3. Or appendix 3.
So this is a breakdown of what our proposed 2023 construction budget is looking like. So I broke down each road that we're anticipating to try to complete next year. So we have County Road V, which is a continuation of what we've already been in the process of doing the last 3 years. We are looking at approximately $513,000 of local funds to recondition that 1.58 miles worth of road. We do not have any DOT funding with this particular project. It's all local funds that would have to be put towards that. Next road is that County Road Z, which is another road reconditioning project, which a reconditioning project is basically just glorified pulverize and repave. Little bit additional widening and drainage work. So County Road Z, we are estimating cost is just over $1 million, which I have highlighted in red there. With that project, we do have some LRIP funding, which is local road improvement program through the DOT. So with that, we have approximately $200,000 that gets allocated to that project. So we'd be looking at how that process works is we as the county would have to pay 100% of that until the project is complete, and then we get reimbursed that $200,000 from the state. County Road B projects, that's where our big ticket item lies. These are both grant funded projects. We have Highway B from 1229 to I-94 as a STP urban project, which is an 80% match by the DOT. So that means they pay 80% of the overall total cost. We pay 20%. This particular project has been on the books since 2016. When we have put this project together for an estimated cost and approval through the DOT. At that point in time, we estimated this project to cost $4.3 million. We actually went round and round with the state to get that $4.3 million. Obviously, today with the rate of inflation, that has ballooned to approximately $6.3 million. That's the nature that we're in right now. That particular project, if we do not do it, it basically goes away and we're on the hook for 100%. We have to utilize these STP funds by the fiscal year 2024. So we have to have it completed by June of 24. This project must take place next year in order to get it done. It won't happen from May to June in 2024. There's too much work to be done on that. So that is a complete reconstruction with improvements with signals, lighting, turn lanes, structural support for the semi-traffic. That is an alternate route for I-94. We are proposing concrete pavement, which is obviously exponentially increased in cost. So like I said, we are making improvements. With that, the DOT pays for the project as it's being completed, and as the project is being completed, they will send us invoices for payment. So they pay basically 100%, and then we are on the hook of the 20% as the project is progressing. So this could actually, those particular projects could go into 2024 as well for payment, just so everybody's aware of that as well. By the time the project is closed out. The other project is County Road B from I-94 to Packer Drive. Everybody's familiar with that by the railroad tracks. We all are aware that's pretty rough. Right now, that is the proposed cost is $2.4 million. That has an MLS LRIP grant through the DOT of approximately $1 million allocated to that. So with this project, it's a little bit different than the STP project. We as the county have to pay the entire total cost. Once the project is complete, then we get reimbursed that $1 million. So that's why what I've tried to do is to highlight the numbers in red. That's what we're looking at, that we're gonna have to, as a county, pay for to complete these projects. And then reimbursement amounts will come after that. Just to kind of round out the rest of the highway construction budget is the County Road D project. That is an STP project by Irvington Hill is what we call that. We started the process for design on that particular project. That is an 80-20 match project. So just the design costs right there is what we will be needed to pay our share of the design cost of that $63,000. And then we also have a bridge on C, Muddy Creek. That is also an STP bridge replacement project. So that's an 80-20 match. So the design costs are $21,600 to complete that project. which is scheduled for a 2024 reconstruction. County Road D is also 2025 construction is what it's proposed currently. County Road D and B, last but not least, is we're requesting engineering funds to try to make some improvements for future projects. Two particular projects that I've allocated are County Road D up by Jakes and Pioneer. We have a drainage issue, we have safety issues. There's a lot of asphalt sitting up there and no curb or anything to differentiate where the road is. So we have to start the process of try to make improvements for safety. We at the highway level have tried to get grants for that particular project and we have been denied twice. The issue with that is in particular, that particular roadway is in urban development in the city of Menominee. Actually, the urbanized development goes all the way out to the Tainer Lake area. So if we would get grant money for that, it would go on the city's portion, but the county would have to pay for it. So that's why we've gotten denied. There's less money in that urban development. County Road B project, obviously, we all know how rough B is north of the railroad tracks going to State Highway 40. We are looking at in 24 trying to reconstruct that as well, just replace the asphalt that's deteriorated. So we do have to start the process of trying to get some engineering design. Because looking at having that contracted out for future improvements. So any questions? And as you can see on the bottom, that's what our levy is for road construction.
Supervisor Bjork.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned concrete on south of 94 on B. You didn't mention concrete on going north across the tracks and probably up.
It'll be concrete all the way to Packer Drive, which is Anderson Windows intersection. The railroad will be improved. We will have traffic signals at Love's intersection is what we call it, or Badger Drive. Improved turn lanes, coordination signals with the railroad. All the railroad costs are being done by the railroad company for their improvements.
So if you got concrete there from 12 then up to Packer Drive, that would give you quite a few more miles of seal coating that you don't have to do now just about constantly. I mean, it's just
Ending,
isn't it?
The offset to that is obviously in the summer months, we have concrete blowups. So we will have to maintain that as well. And there was a cost analysis to put asphalt or concrete with this portion of B, and it was cost effective to do concrete.
No doubt about it. My experience.
Any other questions?
Justin, do you want to give them a heads up about the tour?
Absolutely. So the last highway committee meeting we had, we suggested to have a tour of Dunn County for all supervisors that want to attend. I've worked with Austin from Transit to provide a bus or two buses for all those that want to attend. I believe we have it September 28th. A Wednesday, September 28th on a Wednesday at 8 a.m. till probably noon. To meet at our highway shop, to take a kind of a grand tour to show our infrastructure at Dunn County. Not showing you all the deteriorated roadways, but just give you a kind of a wide variety of what our roads look like. So
What time?
8 a.m. to noon.
You mean you abandoned the plan to drive up and down 20 B from 12 to Packer Drive and back 7 times in a bus?
We can do whatever we want, but Austin reassures me he's gonna give us the oldest bus we have. So
Well, we've talked about, you've heard Dustin mention a number of times, that we're on a 40-year replacement schedule on our roads. And so part of what he's going to do for the group that tours is to show you what does the road look like after 5 years and 10 years and 20 years, and what does 40 years really look like? As opposed to some of those newer redos. So.
So Dustin, do you want to also touch base on the constructions of these highways? If we were to say we're not going to continue, what are the consequences?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, if we just don't do any of these projects, obviously the costs are going to increase greatly. Just this from last year to this year, we've had an increase of 15 to 20% just with asphalt. Drainage structures, 50% increase for culvert materials. It's just exponentially growing. Like I said, some of these grants, if we don't do it, we're out the 80% match that the DOT is provided for these projects. 40-year road replacement can turn into 60, 80 years. And obviously we can't have that. We have a hard time getting our roads to last 20 to 30 years. So.
Supervisor Gary Bjork.
Sure. Like a lot of these road projects are that we have to pay for them first and we get reimbursed later. In that meantime, there's some pretty big checks. Does that come out of the highway department? Do you have enough money, or does it have to come out of the fund balance for the whole county?
No,
there's-
it would be budgeted in the highway,
Okay,
in highway
there'll be
funds.
money available then
Yes,
in that time frame before we pay for it and we get reimbursed.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
If there's not any other questions, thank you, Dustin.
Thank you.
And I think I was on page. Oh, was I on page? Ugh. Right. Oh, do I have to scroll? Cause I don't know if there's a button that takes me directly to there. So close your eyes for this one because this one's gonna be very dizzy. Okay, so highway. Okay. Okay, please don't crash. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I broke the computer. No. Okay, so highway. Next one is Health and Human Services. So I'm gonna enlarge that one. Okay, not sure what's going on.
Hit the plus arrow.
Yeah, I'm trying. Okay, there it is. I was trying to, and then it must keep. Now it's stuck. Oops. No, it's not going anywhere. I broke it. Okay. For DHS, while this is probably still trying to catch up with my scrolling, going 100 miles an hour. What makes DHS really unique that there are heavy driven by grants. However, their grants are also reimbursed based on expenses. So there's some flexibility in some of these grants. When I say flexibility, like for example, CCS program, which is Community Comprehensive Services Program. So as the expenses or salaries increase, so does the grant. Some of the grants are actually continue on having federal contribution out of 50%, even though allocation might be capped at a state level, but federal will continue contributing a percentage till the end of the year. So also DHS has a lot of services that they provide that are billable through using third party, private insurance or Medicaid or Medicare. So now that this caught up with me, let's go back here. So then DHS over here is indicating a decrease in levy by 469,000. But a lot of it here too is the COVID grant. So it's just as a similar impact that it had on the public health. So as the COVID, they kind of shifted different programs and started going into the. Oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna say that doesn't look right. Okay, so human services. Oh, geez, I'm sorry. Okay, so undo everything I just said. Except, undo all the levy requests. So, but everything else was accurate. So here, DHS actually has an increase of roughly about $11,000. So on a scheme of things, it's a huge department, delivers a lot of services, given that they're driven, a lot of grants and opportunity to have some of the federal matches. So even though they have a high increase in those wages, it's actually compensated by some of those grants. Also, operating cost, you see there is a significant decrease there too. But at the same time, there won't be that levy need as well. Because given the COVID, DHS, similar to public health, provided services and also had a supporting grant for those as well. So as that has changed, that decrease some of the revenue, but also the expense. Then we have the neighbors of Dunn County. So what I did here is I split it out by each house. So we have, I'm sorry, not each house, but more of the service type. So like the skilled nursing home facility, direct care, and so on. So even though it's a short summary, but it's consisting of those three houses. Now, as far as their staff, previously, nursing home was contracting CNAs, I believe, some of their staff to provide the services, which then we reshifted that, and actually some of them are now on our payroll at a different pay scale. So that has a significant change in operating cost, because that's how previous year, that's what they were considered as an operating cost. Now, also in 2023 for operating cost, that also has significantly increased. And a lot of it is based on the need for the services. And the inflation costs going up for food and the operating costs. But there mainly is driven by the services that they provide and being billed. So decrease of 469,000 to the good. Now, keep in mind that what this does not include is depreciation. And we're working on the operating budget, money coming in, and physical checks or money that we paying out. So nursing home here anticipated that they will have a decrease in levy. So now the depreciation is exceeds by that. So if the depreciation were to be accounted for, then there's approximately $209,000 that would potentially be needed. But we won't know until our financial statements are done in 2020 for 2022 to know really that depreciation. But for this purpose, I wanted to show operating budget, their cash flow and their disbursements.
And we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. For those of you who have been through the long conversations about NDC, that depreciation number has always been an area of discussion and debate. And in the end, landed on not budgeting it because it is not actually a dollar expense. We're not writing a check for depreciation. However, when we get to the audit at the end of the year, you will see it gets accounted for in the financial position of NDC. But if we left that depreciation number in there, it then looks like NDC is looking for levy and they're not. So I appreciate that it's confusing. And even, even for us, we had to really sort of think it through, but we chose to do it this way for the purposes of this presentation, because there's not actually a levy ask to sustain the neighbors for 2023.
Right. So this is our last one, which is the Transit Commission. So it consists of one individual, one person. So majority of that too is increase in the wages. But if you look at to the far right, there is no levy request as the expenses went down here. One of them particular was capital costs in 2022, that it's not there this year. So that's that significant difference. But they increased some of their fares. So the fare increase was with the UW Stout, about 3%, to offset some of the increase in cost. So they're not asking for any levy. So this brings us to the end, and now this warrants a short break, and then department heads are here to answer any of your questions, the questions that you may have. Oh, new positions? Absolutely. So this is again, very high level. Some of these new position requests doesn't really suggest that they're asking for a individual. It could also be that they're increasing in hours for someone that we already have as a part-time, and then increase their hours. So increasing hours doesn't also mean going from part-time to full-time. It could still remain to be at a part-time position, but just here this identifies what would that increase in those hours be. And I counted as far as FTEs. So you see 4 FTEs equivalent to 2080 hours. You might look at it as 4 people, but it's all the various departments. So I just want to point that out. So the requests for new positions were really based on what is the need of the department. Some departments, of course, had an increase in services, increase in caseloads, if that's their case. Some of these new positions, even it's in a requesting of 425, is offset by some of the revenue sources that they may have. So for medical examiner, this is actually increasing the hours. I don't mean to pick on medical examiner particularly, but what sticks out is that, they had a lot of part-time deputies. So minimizing those part-timers and turning it into a full-time position will allow that coverage. But really what that difference is that 0.2 FTE. So in the patrol, there is a deputy sheriff and sergeant. And again, these are based on family benefits because, depending on how we're going to fill them for these particular ones. So this would include salaries and fringes and insurance altogether. So treasurer is also asking to increase hours. Veteran Services is asking for that part-time person to cover some of those front desks, which then will allow Greg to focus more on that delivery of service. I'm not going in any particular order. Field crew, it's just what that is. Those are seasonal staff to help highway department to fill in some of the needed work. Emergency management is an increase of hours. And then we have the circuit court judge, also increase of and a quarter with the dollar amounts. So in total, the new requests that would be proposed, and if approved, would be that additional $425,000. And all these salaries and wages are also calculated based on the pay grid and starting at the lowest possible. And also under the assumption that it's gonna, if they're benefit eligible, would be a family plan, which is at its highest out of all the other options.
Thank you, Beata. I think we'll take a short break. Get a drink of water, go to the restroom, then we'll go back and it'll be open for questions. Try to make a 5-minute break if you can.
Budget.
Yeah, I got a loud voice.
Yeah, can you stop sharing for a bit and I'm gonna.
I'd like to thank everyone. As I went around during break, I talked to quite a few of the board members. The feeling I get that this is a positive step that we're doing here. And I think that we're going to try to, well, I know we're going to continue to do it, try to fine tune it. Today, it was held on a Saturday to see basically how quickly it would take us to get through it. I think there's a sentiment that we would just as soon do this on an evening rather than on a Saturday or a Sunday. So I think that's the direction we'll go. And as we go into the questions now, we'd like to take the questions in the order of the presentation. So we can kind of concentrate on each area as we go. And having said that, I'll leave it up to Chris.
I wanted to share one more piece of information, talking over here to Supervisor Quinn and Supervisor Rogers. We were talking about the neighbors and I wanted to share, we'll stick this in the, we can still do that, right, Beata? We could
Yep.
still, we'll stick this in the supplementary information or the additional detail information. This is a summary provided by our auditor, and I know this is tiny. So we'll stick it out there. But when we talk about moving that depreciation number around, this gives you an idea. So something the auditor put together, there's a red line here in the middle that shows the operating income or loss. Losses would be in parentheses over the last decade. And the only year, well, there were 2 years in that decade, but the last year that there was an actual operating loss before depreciation was in 2013 of $337,000. Otherwise, all of those years forward since that have seen operating income. And I just think that's a really important piece for you to know. This really changed my understanding of what was happening with NDC, and I thought it would be helpful for you as well. So if you want to drill into it more, we'll stick it out there with the supplementary documentation.
I have a question on that then. If I'm understanding you correctly, then all but 1 year, we actually had an operating profit, but the money that we took out of the general fund was to support the debt payment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Supervisor Morales.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have this document in our supplementary material?
No, we'll put it out there for you.
All right, thank you. Just a clarification.
And I'll, after this meeting, I will also upload the presentation that we provided you earlier in the morning as a reference as well.
All right, let me find, go ahead.
Go ahead. Dick.
Yeah, just if we could put up that screen back,
Sure.
if possible, please. Previous one. Yeah, so when we see these losses and profits, not necessarily profits, but we're not in a loss. What was the census in these years on average regarding the neighbors? Because I know we've had during 2020, we had staff shortages due to COVID. And just kind of wondering, are we fully utilizing the facility that we have at this particular time?
Carmen had a previous commitment, so she is not here today, but my understanding is we still have one house that is not open. Somebody knows this more than I do. Yes, they're all, I'm seeing nodding of heads, so.
Jane Hansen is also on.
Oh, Jane is on, I'm sorry.
She's
Yes.
online.
Yes, Jane.
Hi there.
Want to
this is
speak to
Jane.
that?
Yeah, what was it? Would you rephrase the question again?
Basically, seeing the profit and loss over a period of time. And then my question is that due to the fact that we were short-staffed in 2020 due to COVID issues, are we fully utilizing the neighbor's facility to make sure that our census is as full as it can be? Because I know a nursing home runs most efficiently when all the beds are full.
That is correct. Staffing is an issue nationwide with hospitals, clinics, and skilled nursing facilities. At the moment, part of the central building is still closed due to, I believe, staffing. It was closed. The one unit was completely closed, so a third of central. Now that third is reopened. So yes, it has had an impact. We're spending more on contract nurses and CNAs. But the COVID dollars that came in were substantial and covered that. In 23, there won't be as many dollars to cover that. We have a lot of Medicare census right now. It looks very healthy.
All right, thank you. I was just wondering how that contributed to the profitability of the organization, that's all.
Yep, if it wasn't for the COVID dollars, it would have not looked so good.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
All right, let me go one more time. All right, so here is the order in which you saw the presentations. I would start. Does anyone have any questions regarding administration, county manager and finance department, human resources, IT? Well, maybe I'll break them up. Let's do county manager and finance. How about human resources? I would ask in this forum, because I think it's really helpful information. Jenna, are you prepared to just talk just a sense without direct numbers, but just about the positive impact that we're starting to hear about reform and its number and its in our claims and in its usage? Yeah, if you would, that would be great.
Good morning. So I did recently report to the Committee on Administration on specific numbers, but essentially so far in the first 2 quarters of 2023, the amount of savings that we have accumulated as a result of Reform Medicine, which is our near site clinic, as well as our pharmacy and Aletheus, which is like a healthcare shopping tool, basically. Where we're at, where we expected to be 3 years from now, as far as utilization and savings, just 6 months in. So I think Beata alluded earlier to the fact that our funding ratio is so low that we need to start having the conversation about potentially adjusting premiums or any sort of other costs to make sure that we're not taking in more than we can spend. So we're in a really good place right now with the health insurance. Any questions?
Thank you. Sure. All right, questions about IT? CJCC? Workers' comp and our health insurance fund? Child support? Josie, I know you're here. Josie, do you want to speak for a moment about the shift of service fee, service fees for service, serving, whatever?
Am I on?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. So my ask for a levy is increasing $10,134 from last year. That is a result of two things. The bulk of it is an increase to salary and fringe. But also the sheriff's department has informed me that they will, well, starting in June of this year, they're charging the child support agency for service of process. So that's serving our papers on case participants, notifying them that they have to appear for a court date. Serving people is statutorily required. So prior to June of this year, my office had always paid for private process service outside of Dunn County, throughout the state of Wisconsin and the country. But Dunn County, within the boundaries of Dunn County, had always been free. So now that we're going to be charged for that service, I had to increase my operating costs to cover that. So, and there's a county ordinance that makes it allowable for the sheriff to charge me.
And the flip side of it is that you also can claim some revenue for those service costs, correct?
Sure. So the child support agency is a federal program that is administered by the counties. So for allowable expenses, and service of process is one of those expenses, I submit that to the state, my expenditures every month. And then on a quarterly basis, the federal government will reimburse us for 66% of those costs. So I, whatever the sheriff charges, right? I'll get some of that back, but I'm still on the hook for the other 33% of it. So, and to be fiscally responsible, I'm also pursuing cheaper options for service. So that 66% reimbursement might be a result of me paying, North Country investigation as opposed to the sheriff. But
All right, questions about the court system? Corporation Council? I think county board and committees, unless you want to ask yourself some questions, you're probably okay. County clerk? I don't know. I just want to know where that 0.04% FTE is in the county clerk's office.
It's a very good question. That goes to, the money is for the Board of Canvass, individuals that come in to certify the election results.
I thought that was like one toll of one individual.
It's close.
Yeah. Okay. District Attorney's Office.
Supervisor Bjork.
Mr. Chairman, a district attorney, along with a few other ones, we're talking about some changes in their office because of receiving a grant. And I guess what many people often ask and wonder, and so do I, is that just because you receive a grant and when the grant runs out, how does it, who decides whether we continue with that particular program or not? And was that for an additional person for the district attorney?
I believe that actually was a reduction of their victim.
I'm gonna pull,
It's
I'm
not
gonna pull
reduction.
the summaries up.
Okay. So I think the short answer to your question, Supervisor Bjork, is that it varies. So some things we start. For instance, most recently, I know in the Department of Human Services, there was a 16-month grant for a community health worker in the Aging and Disability Resource Center. When we hired that, when we accepted that money and when we hired that position, we made it known that at the end of the 16 months, if the money didn't continue, that person would be then sunsetted and would not have a job. And they took the job knowing that. So when we know that there's time limited funding, that in fairness to the staff, that is made known and that's the plan for it. More often, funding levels change within grants and allocations, and those are a little bit harder to predict or to know exactly what to do with. So as there might be decreases or increases, those you do your best to manage. So there have been programs that have been fully grant funded, and then that grant funding went away, and we've had to decide whether we can absorb those costs in our existing operational costs or whether we need to cut those programs. And I think it's happened both ways.
So just to follow up then, as far as the decision-making process on whether you continue with a particular program or person, is that done by the department head, or is it reviewed through the department committee? before?
Again, I think it a bit matters whether or not losing that grant funding actually will result in request for additional funding from someplace, because sometimes you truly can, other changes in departments might have made it possible to absorb the cost to that. I'd say if that cost is being absorbed in the existing operating budget, then that happens at the department head or at the budget management level. If that position is, if it's going to result in loss of funding and then continuing to have to find a different spot for that funding and it can't be absorbed, then those would be budget adjustment requests that would come to, or new or additional funding requests that would come to the budgeting process and or the board. So for instance, if a department had 10 positions and they lost their grant funding for one of those positions, you would see that reflected in the next year's budget request because their salary increases would stay higher and they would have less money to cover that. Some of those are in there and they're in those explanations. I don't know about that grants particularly, but some of those are in the explanation. So Beata, I believe in the district attorney's office,
Yeah.
that was part of their explanation, correct?
Right. So the district attorney's office gets a victim witness grant. And that grant of $158,000 supports 2.14 FTE. But their department consists of 8.9 FTEs. So some of that portion, but what makes the levy increase for district attorneys specifically, it's not really a grant related, but they also anticipate a retirement, and that individual is going to have a payout as liability to the county to pay out their vacation or sick bank, which is $34,800. So that levy that they're asking for is mainly for that purpose. If you look at their operating costs, there too, balance it to what they're allowed as far as their grant. If there is an additional grant that will come in, more money available. So what happens then, there'll be, like Chris said, a budget adjustment, and that would be the revenue side, and the expense side, let's just say they allow wages. So we would then just decrease the levy by that amount, or let's just say the grant only covers no wages, but perhaps equipment or something that the department needs to purchase, then that would be the expense side.
I would just, kind of conclude that by saying specific to the district attorney's office. I think Supervisor Beata would be happy to kind of look at that in more detail with you if you'd like to. Because it is complicated. In the general to that question it's complicated. It's not an attempt to hide it. That's why you have all of the detail. That's why you see the FTE counts. But it really, especially I just coming from my background in DHS, especially in large budgets, there's so many moving pieces at one time that sometimes you can do creative things with funding in order to keep people on staff. Other times you have to say, we've reached the end of that funding. We don't have an additional funding source, and those people have to, that position has to be done.
And out of the other departments as they work through this 2023 budget, they also acknowledge the fact that yes, the grant is ending and they budgeted limited term employees just for that time. And sometimes, in some departments, it was appropriate to increase part-time hours because the grant is available. Assuming, let's just say the grant is not going to be there next year, then they would resume back to lesser hours. So I just want this board to know that every department considered all possible options on how to keep this cost low. And that is, if a grant is coming through and the grant, if we can utilize existing staff to reduce the levy, and if they qualify to do that, because depending on the grant, maybe it requires certain credentials. If that individual, that employee is currently employed by Dunn County, then it will just help offset their salaries and wages, which, then reduce the levy. But in, some grants might just be so particular to say, this grant will only cover for this particular service. And then we would then decide if we're going to take this grant or not, because that too, just because a grant is available, departments will then look to see what currently exists as far as the support. And does it make sense to take this grant? Because, if this grant it might sound attractive, and says, that's a lot of money, but then one thing to consider is, well, they require a full-time person. Well, if the decision is to take on this and hire full-time position, then if the grant is gone, then that FTE becomes levy because there's no other funding sources. So the departments do consider all avenues as far as their grants and how it's funded and covering their operating expense.
Well, in one concrete example, I would just draw your attention to would be in the CJCC budget. There was a grant that was a 4-year grant for a reentry program, people that were reentering the community coming out of jail. It had staffing. It was contract staffing, but staffing associated with that. When that grant ended, that position that went away. We're no longer contracting for that position with the Center for Independent Living.
If I might interpret what Larry asked, you want to know whether that position is going to go away, if the grant goes away, or if it's going to stay. We can get you that answer.
Yeah.
Is that what you're looking for?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, all right.
I've heard you say, Gary, many times, a lot of these programs are, you pay me now or do you pay me later? And it kind of brought today the discussion with Reform Medicine and how services that they offer are directly affecting our insurance payouts. And, there you can see, a quick results where some of these other programs, this pay me later can be quite a bit later. Okay, I'm done.
Appreciate your concern, Supervisor Rogers.
So I guess I have a question on how you account for benefits. You had alluded to it just a minute ago. So like the vacation and all of that you pay a person once they retire or move on. And that goes into the next budget year. And I don't understand why we're not accounting for that when it's earned. When an employee gets paid every pay period, that benefits that are correlated to that paycheck should be accounted for at that time instead of kicking it down the road until they retire. Can you elaborate on why that's not accounted for in the budget?
So as an employee works, they, depending on when they were onboarded and depending on how they're accruing their vacation and sick, based on how many years of service they had with the county. So everybody's at a different, but there is a percentage as to how many hours can employee accrue for pay period. Also, there's a cap. After a certain period of time, employee can accrue. They have to take vacation. If they don't take vacation, they're going to cap it and they're just not going to accrue anymore. So the idea is here to encourage employees to take time off. Now, we do on the from the financial side of things, we do accrue. But when we do budget, how can I explain this? When we do budget, when an employee has a bank, right? So if they work, then they get paid salary. And then if they have vacation, it comes off of that bank. So they wouldn't be necessarily money set aside. It's a liability. So if we were to say, and I've considered this and how we're going to budget for those. So if we took and say, well, let's just say certain percentage of people, probability of them retiring, what would that liability be? Okay, and then so instead of that, we're then going to budget for that payout if we are aware that individual or they're willing to share that they're going to retire. Because technically we don't really, it's not appropriate for us to go and ask employee, are you going to retire? Should we budget? Because they're entitled to a certain amount of hours in their bank. So I don't know if I'm probably.
Well, I think it's like more that. So if you think about an employee, let's say an employee makes $50,000 of salary. I'm going to say, just for easy math, $30,000 of that is actually called wages. Maybe $10,000 of that is sick time and $10,000 is vacation in terms of where it's drawing from out of banks. They might use all their leave time in that year, and that is part of their $50,000 that they're getting compensated for the year. They may carry over some time to the next year, but they might use it all that year. And then it's not actual additional cost. It's just that they're trading out more of their, what we would take out of a salary bank and taking it out of a holiday, a sick leave or a vacation bank. There isn't really a way to say you'd have to double fund. You'd have to say everything that's sitting in a bank has to have a different funding source outside of their salary in order to be putting it away for a future. And some people will just use theirs before they're done and there's no payout. So it is a challenge. I think we've tossed it around a bunch of times how to do that, but it is a challenge.
But that's, once they earn it, that's the employee's money. It no longer belongs to the county. So it's a liability when it's earned, not a liability in the future. We probably have $500,000 of monies owed that the county owes employees for benefits that have already been earned.
But they might use them. You know, like if I have, say, 100 hours in a sick bank, yes, it has a dollar amount, but if I get sick next week, it might all be gone and it doesn't cost anything additional.
Because I could be at work, so.
I hear what you're saying. It's a challenge to balance that.
I think that's a good question. Perhaps a question and answer for a different day. Supervisor Headland.
I believe that that is part though of a balance sheet, is it not?
Right.
Doesn't the balance sheet for NDC show that current running
That-
liability?
That's right.
Okay, so if you want to know that, you could look at it as a balance sheet item for any particular department, but it is flexible, just
Right.
like you're saying, depending as they use it or don't use it. But
Right.
it is part of a balance sheet, and I'm sure that it's on the books that way. Thank you.
So let's just say, worst case scenario, what are the odds of happening now? Let's just say everybody retired on Monday. Okay, so what would that liability payout be? We know that's not going to happen. In my previous role, what we did is we looked at individuals' birth date and did apply a methodology based on the likelihood or the probability of somebody to retire. What would that liability be for that year based on everybody else's bank? And then so of course, it's if there's a union, if there is a agreement, what is that payout? But it doesn't indefinitely accrue because there is a cap as far as how much you can accrue. I can let Jenna speak to that as to how many hours can really sit that is that liability. So if you are on a vacation, and you're still getting paid the same dollar amount if you were in the office. So it's not that you get paid as being in the office, and in addition to that, paid on your vacation. So it's one or the other draws from that bank. So you accrue that time to have time off, but it's not really added on top of your working hours. But people that are allowed to accrue or carry over from 1 year to the year, that has that growth. So I don't know, I can get back to you to let you know what that limit hours is, but you might have a limit, I don't know, let's just say 250 hours a year. So one employee might make $40 an hour versus one that makes $23 an hour. But not all of it gets paid out as a cash, but regardless, some of the money gets paid in a form of a check and the other one gets put into their health retirement. Some of the money.
Thank you, Beata, and I have two thank yous. Thank you Supervisor Rogers for asking, and thank you Supervisor Headland for clearing it up a little bit. We'll move on.
All right, questions regarding emergency communications? Environmental services, planning and zoning? Land and water? Or the surveyor? External organizations and libraries. The fair board. The medical examiner. Health department. Facilities. Parks. Register of deeds. Sheriff's Department. You have a question?
Supervisor Larry Bjork.
I thought things were moving too fast there for a minute. Sheriff's Department talked about a deputy sheriff. And I would like a little clarification, as at one time I thought Dunn County, we had what was called an under sheriff. And I was wondering if that was an elected position or not, and how would you describe a deputy sheriff as far as responsibilities and management?
I think we could ask Chief Deputy Maltoff to speak to that. Marshall, would you mind coming up just so people can hear? Yeah, please.
As far as the definition of deputy sheriff, everybody but the sheriff is a deputy sheriff. I'm the chief deputy. Technically, I'm a deputy sheriff, but my title is chief deputy. Same thing with the sergeant. All the sergeants, deputy sheriffs, just the rank they hold is sergeant. Same thing with investigators. Everybody's deputy sheriff under the control of the sheriff. So basically, it's just a title given to that. As far as it comes to under sheriff, most counties in the state have gone away from under sheriff and changed the position to chief deputy. Under sheriff was a position that was appointed by the sheriff. And a lot of departments have gone to the designation of chief deputy because of the fact that chief deputy will stay continuously. If you have a sheriff change, chief deputy has been there for a while, and it's basically a continuation of services. That way it can change every time in the past under sheriff. Here it was changed approximately, I'm guessing about 10 to 12 years ago to chief deputy. That way, when a sheriff's changed, the chief deputy's been there, that works with the budget, policy, procedure, because anybody can be sheriff. It's an elected position. You don't have to have any law enforcement experience or any previous history with the sheriff's office. So with the chief deputy being there continually, it's easier for a new sheriff to come in and continue with services, or have somebody that's been in the position for a while, that knows policy, procedure, budget, and all that. We haven't seen that. Typically, it's somebody with law enforcement experience, typically somebody with the sheriff's office, but that's not always, the way it is.
Any knucklehead like myself could be sheriff if I get enough votes.
If you're popular enough, yes.
Won't be here.
Did you have any questions, specific questions about the position requests? Is that where that, that came from?
Well, only that I had no idea that your position basically, would be the law enforcement trained person that would be consistent in the sheriff's office if a knucklehead was elected sheriff.
Correct. And a chief deputy can be hired from outside the office too. If a department opens up a chief deputy position, most often somebody from within that has experience, but there are sheriff's offices that hire chief deputies from out with budget experience, administrative experience. So it can be somebody from outside. Technically, it's not law enforcement because the position with a lot of departments is more financial hiring practice positions. But again, that could vary too.
So was the request then for deputy sheriff for what? For another?
What it would
lieutenant,
be
for
is,
another-
we have two requests, but they will both be deputy sheriffs to fill positions that would probably be promoted from within. The one was for the recreation officer position. That request is for a deputy sheriff that a majority of their time would be doing a rec patrol like boating, UTV, snowmobile. With a large portion of that position is basically funded through the DNR. Every time we use recreational hours, we're refunded by the DNR, same as the equipment and anything associated with that, at about a 65% rate. Approximately half of the salary we look at, if we were to get that position, would be increased hours in the recreational patrol area, which would also equate to a higher refund or payback by the DNR for those hours. So approximately half of the $120,000 salary would be paid back through the DNR for those worked hours. The second position, a supervisor, sergeant's position for the investigative division, that would be just for overseeing the investigative division. What happened a few years ago when we had our investigative sergeant retire, we took that position and reassigned it back to the patrol division. At that time, we only had 3 sergeants working, which left us with basically one entire shift throughout the week being unsupervised. And we saw that as a high liability area. So we now have 4 sergeants on patrol supervising 24 hours a day, which left us with our day shift sergeants sharing supervision of investigations. That's awfully cumbersome, takes away from their times, especially when we have large cases like the recent homicides and the quadruple homicide victims that were dumped in our county. Those sergeants from our day shift get pulled into that to supervise the larger cases, what takes away from their patrol responsibilities. So our request is to add a sergeant's position to oversee investigations full-time, as to allow the day shift sergeants to attend to their duties and have one person continually overseeing our investigations area.
Would then the recreational deputy be the person that would be in charge for like some event in the county where law enforcement needed to be there? Who would be the management person for, keeping order at that?
If you're talking just any situation,
Well, we're all the way from the Ridgeland Fair to the Dunn County Fair.
that's usually a patrol supervisor. What the recreational position would be is, it would be a full-time deputy where we're hoping that about 60%, 70% of their time would be towards recreational activities. boat patrol, UTV patrol, snowmobile patrol, teaching classes, stuff like that, the additional 25-30% of their time could be used to assist patrol and possibly reduce overtime by filling patrol shifts. They would have the same training and qualifications as a patrol deputy. It's just the majority of their time would be utilized working recreational activities, which then we get reimbursed for.
One last thing before they throw me out. Sheriff's Reserve, can you give us just a little idea on where that's going or has gone? Or where it might-
We're authorized up to 30 reserve deputies. Unfortunately, we've been down to about 5 lately. The fact of being is it's harder to find people that can be reserve deputies. If we hire good qualified individuals, they don't stay reserve deputies real long because
They get bought.
they get pulled up by somebody else. And that's just the fact of the matter.
Supervisor Vogel.
Thank you. I had a couple questions. So you said one of the deputy sheriffs would be recreational, but how come the outside revenue didn't go up to compensate for these positions? Because the budget looks like it's over 800,000 additional. I know some of that salary increases and things like that, but these two positions are above and beyond, right? What we currently have. And so you would think if we're getting reimbursed, then our revenue from outside sources should go up.
Yeah, and that is true. So I'll answer that yes and no. So yes, their revenue, other revenue sources went up by 279,000
Okay.
from 2022 to 2023. Okay, and then, but also keep in mind that what contributes towards that 900,000 was the increase to deputy positions, and there's quite a bit of them. And that was per the union bargaining agreement.
So 800,000 was just salary increases?
727,000 of that, yes. It's pertaining to wages and that's correct.
Okay. So the new positions,
The new, and then the 279, the revenue source went up from 689,000 to 969,000.
But those two new positions are included in that
Right.
$727,000
Yes, I'm
number,
sorry. Yeah,
right?
that's correct.
so am I looking, so it's 688,000
So about,
for outside revenue, or am I reading the chart wrong? Maybe I have an old file. In the summary? Isn't that?
yeah, so it's 839. On the top, their total funding sources from other revenues outside the fund balance that was applied last year and for their capital improvement. So if you just take that out of the equation, so their revenue increased by 279. And oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were raising your hand.
And a good
Right.
portion of that is in salaries too. We had contractual increases to the medical, food, and mental health costs in the jail.
Right.
Are anticipated. We do have an RFP route right now for a food contract in the jail. The current contract we're under, we can extend for 1 year. And we've been told by our contractual provider that there would be a 12% increase in food costs for next year. Hopefully that'll go down with an RFP. But talking to other counties, that's consistent with a food cost increase for items like that. In addition, we had increased our fuel costs to the pre-2022 budget line item. We reduced them this last year because the excess we had with the low fuel prices in 21. But obviously now we're over that, so we've asked for to return to the previous line item amount. Otherwise, we have it's a lot of the money in addition to increases in salary was contractual costs in the jail and other maintenance cost increases.
Right. So bulk of that 800. So the change too is specific to of those, just the mid salary increases, mid-grade increase is 246,000. So the two budget requests is 246,000, but what I didn't really narrow down and say, well, out of that 246, how much of it was going to be offset by a revenue? I didn't identify exactly that number, but did you say it was fully funded or percentage?
Percentage, we believe about 60 to 65,000, obviously depending on the hours worked. And then each area of rec patrol is at a different reimbursement rate. So depends how many hours you spend at snowmobile, boat, or UTV, what the reimbursement rate is received from the DNR.
And about 81,000 of that is anticipated retirement, sick and vacation bank payout.
So will the levy go down when we figure in some of the reimbursement? We'll get back,
For 2024.
no, 2023.
So that, so the revenue and the additional positions is already reflected in that 800,000.
All right, thank you.
Supervisor Headland.
Yeah, thank you. There's a position that's been created through a grant from CJCC. I understand, is that just going to be provided by the current staff we have at the sheriff's department? Or is it going to be one new person? How are we handling that?
It'll be the behavioral health position that was received through the grant will be filled by an existing employee, but then we will hire somebody to backfill the position that's vacated by that person doing the position. At this point, the grant's only for a year, so.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, Marshall.
Thank you.
Treasurer. UW Extension. Veteran Services. Debt Service. Our Health Insurance Fund, Highway and Bridges. I had a chance to talk to Dustin a little bit. Any additional questions about Highway? Human Services. Neighbors of Dunn County. And Transit. And Workman's Comp. Good.
So you said it's a self-funded program. I'm wondering, like supposing a worker has a really catastrophic injury, and has to file a very expensive claim, like in the millions or something, like what kind of risk is the county taking on? Is there like, some kind of insurance that we as a county can take to mitigate that risk, or does that work?
Jenna? Doing our health insurance.
So my understanding about workers' comp is somewhat new. I'm new to my role, but we are self-funded in that we can pay our own premiums, but we do still participate in a larger fund that is maintained by the state. So I don't know that there's any sort of stop loss cap or anything like that, but the fund is maintained and, based on expected claims. It's been healthy the past 5 years as well. So I think the answer to the question is no, but that there isn't a concern.
Got it.
Thank you.
Jen, I have a question. Generally speaking, in health insurance, which I think we have, we have a certain loss level, then we have reinsurance that kicks in to cover the exceedingly large claims. Do we have that same situation in workers' comp?
No.
Is there a reason why we don't?
I can find the answer and report back.
Yes, yes, because some workers' comp claims can be extremely expensive and ongoing. So thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Any additional questions? And or I would also open it up to the department heads who sat here so patiently for this time. If there's anything that you'd like to draw attention to or advocate for with regard to your own budgets, I would give you the opportunity to do that. Going once? Going twice?
And we dare you to face this gauntlet.
All right, so a couple of kind of housekeeping things at the end so that I don't forget to say this. Supervisor Morehouse left at the entrance some print copies of the Dunn County Housing Study. We are attempting to get as robust a response to that as possible. You want to take some print copies and distribute them out in your district or whatever you want to do. If you want more, we'll get you more. I did send it out to you electronically. If you have a mechanism to send that out electronically within kind of any email listserv that you have, it would be much appreciated. Again, the more information we have, the more robust the outcomes will be for that study. And then again, we would welcome your feedback. Maybe we'll kick out a quick poll via email regarding both the structure of this room as well as the structure of this meeting, and see if it met your needs or if there's things that you recommend. Please be candid, because again, it was our first chance to do this and we are open to what worked and what didn't work. I believe that's all that I have.
I'd like to take a minute, and I think I speak for the whole board, to thank all of our department heads and everybody that works for Dunn County. You do a heck of a good job, I feel, and I think our board does also. And it's bad enough that you got to work 40 hours a week. We bring you here on a Saturday to boot, but really appreciate that. And I'd also like to thank all the supervisors that are willing to serve and that are willing to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. I think it's important in our democracy that we have people that want to participate. And then another thing about this whole budget situation, I can remember when I was first on the board, I remember that I'd get a document from the executive committee and they say, this is what it is, and we got to vote. And my question was, well, when do I get to help make the sausage here? And this is all designed to help the understanding of every board member in the budgetary process and to make it more open and more inclusive, to include everybody. And so I don't want, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Beata for the amount of work that she did to put in this presentation, and also Chris for ramrodding the show. So and putting up with me for substituting for Kelly. I appreciate that. Our Supervisor Hedlund.
Yeah, I'd just like to at this point say thank you to actually our Human Resources Department, starting back with our previous director, Chairman Bartlett, the chairman board chair at that time, and the admin committee put it upon that department to help us find, if possible, a solution, if there was one, to cut medical costs, so that we did not have to continuously, ask the employees to pay more and for us to pay more, as those costs have obviously continued to rise year after year after year. And so out of that was born the reform medicine idea. And, just glad to see that it's taken off, and it's the staff of this county have jumped on board. We thought they maybe would, people are against change, a lot of us, but they really have accepted it. And because of that, I think we're heading in the right direction as much as we can. So thank you to that department and that staff and everyone else.
And just add one more thing unrelated to that. If you have feedback, if you have questions, I speak for all of the department heads to say, give them a call, ask them if you've got questions, need clarification, but also to know that you can speak with your committee chairs who sit on the executive committee. You're welcome to attend the executive committee meetings, but that's where the next rounds of work will occur to close that gap and bring us in with a balanced budget. The goal would be to have a recommendation for a balanced budget by October, your October board meeting, and then it will be approved in November.
Having concluded our business, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. We have a motion. We have a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. I've been waiting all day to do that. We're adjourned. Yeah.